As South Africa assumes leadership of the Values 20, which comes under the G20 Presidency, it brings with it a bold message. It's one of dignity, ethical leadership, and Ubuntu. V20 runs under the theme called Living Values, Enabling Solidarity, Equality, and Sustainable Development. And that's V20. Joining me for this conversation is Alex Mathole, Sustainable Development Stream Lead for V20 South Africa. Alex, thank you so much. Please unpack for us the premise or the foundation of this values-based approach and why it's important in partnership with G20.
Thank you, Zanele, for having us. Throughout the past decade and a half, there's been a conversation around sustainable development, that we need to have equality, we need to have economies that deliver better outcomes for peoples across the world. But what has become very evident is that even the ability to meet the SDG goals is compromised in the sense that we see rising inequalities, we see growing climate crisis, and we see degradation across a number of dimensions. And so part of the conversation we've been having is that we need to have a reset where we have a conversation around values-based leadership. And that in looking at the agenda around development, what are the principles, what are the values that are informing choices of nation states and organizations? What are the values that drive behaviors and what are the values that drive decisions? Because we came to a realization that whatever choices that get made, whether they are policy choices or actions, at the underlying piece or at the foundational level, you have the conversation around values. What we prize is what we do. What we value is what we will continue to perpetuate. And so V20 is challenging that to say, let's have a conversation around the kind of values that we think are important to be able to drive a better future and that we leave no one behind. And so the V20 approach and conversation that we are taking to the G20 is we need to relook at the type of values that the world is prizing. We have, a lot of individualism, which is positive. You need to see yourself, but importantly, as you see yourself, you need to be able to see others. And you are saying, whilst individualistic approaches may have some place, it is important to apply it with a lens that considers the interests of others. So V20 is saying values like Ubuntu must be very important. Values like dignity must be at the forefront of the G20's agenda, ensuring that there's equality and that there's active challenge of the rising inequality that we're seeing becomes important. We are also saying that at the center, G20 must look at ethical governance and ethical leadership. The conversation around accountability must be at the front and center of leadership conversations as the G20 converses about very important topics facing humanity.
And then what are you aiming to achieve? So the conversations are challenging, they're putting forward a way of thinking. Ultimately, though, what is it that you want to solve for and see being responded to, even if we had to look at the list of global goals? Where is the impact that you want this transformative leadership to move and deliver?
First, we are obviously focusing on a lot of research because there's an opportunity to have evidence-based human-centric policies that are developed. Not just policies that talk to a certain sector of the economy that may come across as very elitist, but to have policies that consider the human impacts of decisions. So the V20 has, as I say, a research stream where we are doing this research that really looks at what type of systems ought we have. When you look at scenarios that we have, there's a utopian state where systems disintegrate, where the collaboration systems that we have fall apart, and we are saying that what alternative models are there? So V20, certainly in the research paper that we'll be putting forward, is what an alternative model of engaging certainly that is rooted in values. And so what we are seeing, what we are hoping to do is to also have, in a unipolar world, an approach to global development that is not just centered on one portion or one part of the global economy, but the agenda of Africa, the value systems that Africa has, that it can actually share in the world, must be incorporated in certainly the engagements within G20. So we think that we have a conversation that needs to be had. We can add value to the broader system around, as I say, ethical governance, moral leadership, that I think the African continent can contribute. I mean, just an example, the King Code on Corporate Governance is something that was developed on the African continent in South Africa and has become a yardstick, a standard on governance. And so we're looking at all of these things and saying Africa has practices, Africa has cultures that we believe add value to having systems that are not just about growth, but that are about responsible growth, systems that are just not about capitalism, but about conscious capitalism, where all participants in the system at least can have a better quality of life.
And Alex, for me, that would be a key question is who else is part of this journey? Because to have the conversations, we'll need to enforce or support the continuous implementation of such values and their tracking and their monitoring. So who's coming with on this journey that's now being held by South Africa?
So the V20 is the beautiful part about the V20 is actually an organization of volunteers with an international platform, but obviously with a local reach. And so some of our partners, include business schools, community-based organizations, businesses. We've taken a view that the conversation around values is not sectoral or sectional. So we've opened doors to stakeholders across all levels and tiers of society. From the conversations that you have at a societal level, at a family structure level, at community development activities on the ground, having conversations with business schools around the type of education and training, development and advancement in corporate thinking, how you embed values in there. So the approach of V20 is really a cross-sectional one where we engage with different parties. The unique thing about how the V20 in South Africa is structured is that we've decided not just to do a communique, because you can have this communique that sits there and potentially gathers dust. But we've coupled it with advocacy for the simple reason that we acknowledge that values must be internalized. And you cannot internalize values by leaving them on paper. So we are coupling with advocacy with these dialogues within this community. But the idea also is to be able to put together a measurement framework of defining the type of behaviors that we believe are positive behaviors that contribute to sustainable development. To then couple that with a measurement framework. So the question that you raise is important, is also part of what we are working towards. And for us, a successful outcome is that definition of what are desirable behaviors, and again, around how measurement looks like. And ultimately, success when it comes to this journey is not going to depend just on the Values 20 initiative or the Values 20 movement, but it is a multi-stakeholder engagement. And that's why we are engaging with all of these bodies and putting them under one umbrella, one roof where we can engage. I mean, we're also working with other G20 streams. In the launch, we also had the B20 that participated. So we believe across all the streams, we need to work together as we then say, how do we implement? How do we measure for effectiveness? And how do we gain and maintain momentum throughout? And so quite an organized way of pulling together many forces. CNBC Africa broadcasts across the continent, and I think our viewers would love to know, what is your view of pulling together an African perspective into the global stage? How do you envision, the role of V20 starting here, going out into the rest of the world, and your perspective on how the continent represents itself? Absolutely. We think that whilst, the G20 is located here in South Africa, the story is an African story. So we've actually extended invitations to different parts within the continent around, and we continue to explore formal partnerships on an African platform base to be able to say the values are just not South African. Yes, the issues that we've talked about today have a South African flavor, but they have an transnational implication between all the African states. So certainly we would be looking to engage with the different countries, with the different bodies and organizations on the continent. And we also are open, we are encouraging people to reach out to us that believe that they can really add meaningful value to the conversation around a values-based society. I think South Africa has such amazing potential. Amongst the issues that have disabled our continent has been unethical conduct, has been issues around corruption, has been around self-enrichment. On all of those things have at the center the issue around values. It's been the issue around illicit financial flows. So the behaviors are around individual, corporate, and all of that, if you unpack them, have at their root the issue around values. So we are really looking to partner with like-minded organizations that just don't talk about values, but are committed to put their skin in the game and do something to shape a better future for South Africa, for Africa, and the better, the rest of the world, so that the next generations inherit a world that's far better than what we have at the moment.
What an interesting role to have, and we'll be watching and awaiting the research, especially the invitations for participation. Alex, thank you for your time. That was Alex Mathole, Sustainable Development Stream Lead for Values 20 South Africa.